All right. Oh my gosh. I should have looked in the mirror before I got on here. Look at my hair. Um, in my defense, I spent the morning in my backyard clearing a bunch of like weeds and stuff out of a back corner that I'm turning into a goddess garden. I posted a blog article, I think it was yesterday, maybe the day before, about planting goddess gardens. And anyway, so this morning I was out there like digging in the dirt and stuff. So I'm okay with my hair looking like shit just a little bit. So today, shadow reading. It's Saturday, the 20th. Today is the summer solstice or Litha, and tonight is a solar eclipse. It's happening on the other side of the world from me, so I'm not going to be able to see it, but it is still happening. So that solar eclipse energy is still going to be there. If you happen to be doing stuff this evening, tonight in the U.S., which will be tomorrow morning on the other side of the world, where the actual eclipse will be visible. So, subject today, I was kind of inspired to dive into this subject after a couple of interactions I had this week. So a little bit of background. I talked in a previous session about my background being in healthcare, and I still do keep a registered dietitian credential as a healthcare provider. I occasionally still see patients. They're kind of just, on referral only basis. I don't really advertise that I do that because I'm fairly busy. But sometimes I will work with people if they're referred by a friend or a family member or, a previous client. And this is actually kind of something that I've been aware of for quite some time, but I haven't really dived into on a shadow session. And that is how the shadow self appears in our physical health. How does it manifest in the physical body in terms of ailments, health problems, mental health, physical health, that kind of thing, okay? So when we're talking about the shadow, again, we're talking about that, like, all of those emotions that are typically perceived as negative, right? Fear, shame, guilt, embarrassment, hate, anger, regret, all of that, right? These things that we're taught are negative emotions and that we shouldn't feel them and we should suppress them and never show them. And when we do that, they sort of just like fester inside of us and build up. But when they are because of specific things, like a traumatic event, or sexual assault survivors are a really good example. So when these things happen, we hold on to these emotions that begin. We store them inside our mind, but also they appear in the body in various ways. And so when we're asking how does the shadow self manifest in the physical body or as ailments, illnesses, health problems, that kind of thing, the first thing I want to kind of talk about is, in my background as a healthcare provider, the way that traumatic experiences happen to us and we sort of like internalize them and they become this source of recurring illness. So what starts out as an emotional injury or a psychological stressor. Yes. And that's a great example. So surviving something incredibly traumatic like that. And I'm going to tell you a story about a new patient of mine this week that sort of prompted all of this. But what starts out as something that's purely psychological or emotional, then in some people becomes a physical manifestation. And so if you've heard the term psychosomatic, psycho meaning of the brain, right, or of the mind, and soma meaning of the body. So something that starts in the mind manifests in the body. And I've seen this, in all my years of clinical practice, over and over and over. And I deal with people, most of the patients I see have a lot of complex chronic illness. but a lot of them have digestive problems. And that's specifically why they come to me first, is they need some help with gut health. And I run, all kinds of testing on them. We look at everything. And then there is always inevitably a discussion of, okay, tell me what happened. You said this started at whatever age. What happened around that time in your life? Did you go through a divorce? Was this childhood and you experienced the death of a loved one? Lots of things like that are psychologically or emotionally traumatic for us become then physiologically traumatic or physiologically difficult for our bodies to handle. And we take that psychological or emotional stressor and we let it root in the body, and then it manifests in the body in various ways. Okay, so it doesn't always just manifest as mental health, it can manifest as physical health, and it does. All right, so the story, what brought this to me deciding this would be the topic for today's Shadow Self was a new patient of mine. She, we're chatting on the phone. I always talk to someone for about 10 or 15 minutes, just a brief phone call to get a feel for what's going on. Why did you contact me? What are you looking for? I want to make sure that this is something I can help them with, because if it's not, I don't want to waste their time or mine. So she was referred to me by a previous client. They were good friends. She's in her 60s and she's had digestive problems pretty much since, she said, about 15 years old. And she's kind of describing her symptoms, and I won't go into detail. If you follow my other account, I like to talk about poop all the time, but we don't talk about poop on this account. So I don't want to draw you in there if you're not ready for that discussion. So long story short, I'm listening to her story and I'm going, just writing down all the symptoms. These things started, this is what she's done. She's seen these specialists, et cetera, et cetera. And, she finally finishes and I said, hey, can you, if you don't mind telling me, if you feel comfortable talking about it, what happened when you were 15 or 16? You said that's approximately when these symptoms started to happen. Apart from just normal adolescence and teenager stuff, what happened at that point in your life? And she was like, yeah, I don't mind talking about it. She said, when I was 11, I was sexually abused by someone that worked with my dad. My dad was an alcoholic. My mom was emotionally distant. She was that was her personality. It wasn't like her mother hated her. She just didn't have a maternal personality. And, some people don't. She said at 18, I married just the first guy that came along just to get out of the house. And he was both emotionally and physically abusive. I was in that, oh, okay, there we go. Sorry, I lost my connection. She said, I was in that relationship for several years. I finally got out of it, remarried someone else a couple of years later in my 20s. And she said, when I was pregnant with our first child, he cheated on me. And I stuck with him. We tried to work it out. I thought that we resolved it. And then, when I was pregnant with our second child, he cheated on me again. And yeah, it is a sad story. But the thing is, here's the thing, okay, this woman's in her 60s and she's just telling me this story like we're having a conversation about our favorite clothes over coffee. The resilience that this woman had throughout everything she had been through. She had taken all of this shitty shit that happened to her and was just like, whatever, put your big girl panties on and just plug ahead, okay? Now, the stoic in me can respect that because I am that woman. Like, I've been through shitty shit and I have done exactly that. I've said, you know what? Fuck it. Put your big girl panties on and just deal with it, right? But when we just plug ahead, right? Like, because we have to. Sometimes we have to. Sometimes we are the only person we can depend on, right? We have children we care for. Maybe there's another family member, whatever. It all falls on our heads, right? And we know that we're the only person we can depend on. And so in her situation, she did what many of us do. And I will say women especially, we do this. We just suck it up and deal with it, right? We martyr ourselves in order to continue to get through life, especially when we have children or loved ones we're caring for. And that's how it ends up for us, right? We end up in our 40s, 50s, and 60s with these physical manifestations of traumatic things that we have been through that we're still carrying that are completely unresolved. Even if you're like, you know what, I'm going to forget about that. I'm going to forget about that guy that was an asshole. I'm going to forget about that thing that happened to me whenever. I'm just going to forget about it. We don't forget about it, okay? We do not forget about it. it's still there. And it's there, and it's kind of like knocking on the door, tapping on the window, in your dreams at night or as you're falling asleep, when you're scared to go to certain places, when you're fearful of people, when you run away from bad vibes. And not that any of these things are necessarily bad. These are all survival mechanisms that we've developed. But the point is we don't forget these terrible traumatic things, and they hang out up here. And if they're traumatic enough, or if we give them enough attention, they begin to manifest elsewhere in our body. Now, the gut is a major site where a lot of these manifest. Like raise your hand if you've ever felt like all of a sudden you feel nervous or apprehensive and your gut clenches, right? Like you're just, oh my gosh. Like it feels like you have butterflies, but not in a good way, right? Or if you get super nervous and you have diarrhea, right? Like, and again, I hate to talk about poop on here because this isn't my poop account, but that's one of those physical symptoms that manifests from those psychological or emotional problems. So there's lots of ways that this can happen. This could be endocrine disruption, right? This could be when, we'll get to that. Endocrine disruption, meaning hormone imbalance, thyroid problems, estrogen, progesterone, and I won't go into super great detail, but all of the emotional and psychological stress that we experience, if it goes on for long enough, what our body does when we feel stressed, okay, everybody's probably heard the term cortisol, right? And they've heard the term adrenal, and they've probably heard the term adrenal fatigue, okay? So adrenal fatigue isn't real. It doesn't really exist as a medical condition. But what most people, when they refer to adrenal fatigue, what they're referring to is actually an HPA axis imbalance. And HPA stands for hypothalamic pituitary axis, okay? And adrenals. The mother hormone to all of our other hormones, so cortisol, but also estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, men and women, your mother hormone is pregnenolone, okay? Now, when you are stressed out, your body is going to make cortisol to deal with the stress. It's your chemical messenger that tells your nerves to do certain things, tells your muscles to do certain things, your heart rate, breathing, oxygen, etc. And it will affect the way that your body... Okay, sorry, I keep losing my connection. So when you are chronically stressed, or when you have a chronic emotional or psychological stressor that's constantly on your mind, where you feel fearful, you don't feel stable, you don't feel like you have safety, right? So some of those basic things that your body needs. Think of things associated with like the root chakra and the sacral chakra, okay? The things that are our base survival needs, right? When you don't have those things, you're in a constant state of stress, okay? Even if you don't think you're stressed, even if you think you meditate, you are still stressed because you have this unresolved trauma, okay? Your body makes cortisol. All right. And so for a while, it pumps out a lot of cortisol, and that keeps things stable for you. But over time, years, right? Or if it's a whole lot at once, it could be the course of several months. This cortisol, your body can't keep up with the cortisol demands. And the cortisol is only a temporary fix. It's a Band-Aid. It's not a long-term solution, because the stress is something that's going to last long-term until you deal with it. So as your body runs out of cortisol, it starts to steal pregnenolone. Remember, pregnenolone is that mother hormone. And when you steal that pregnenolone to make cortisol, now you don't have enough pregnenolone to make progesterone and estrogen, and therefore testosterone in women. So now your progesterone and estrogen levels are subpar. You might get blood work done and your doctor might go, oh, they're within normal limits. Like there's this really big reference range that 95% of people fall in. That's called a 95% confidence interval. You could be really, really close to the bottom and your doctor is still going to look at it and go, oh, yeah, it's normal because you're within this range. But you're not normal because you feel like crap. You're gaining weight, you're tired, you might have insomnia, your skin might be breaking out, your hair might be brittle. There's lots of ways that this manifests. And what's happening is your body is stealing that mother hormone that you need to make all of your great progesterone and estrogen, right? Maybe your libido has fallen. Maybe you're experiencing mood imbalances, like you're arguing with people and you're getting upset about things and you're very irritable. So there's lots of ways this can happen. But the point is that initial emotional or psychological stressor is unresolved. Okay, so what happens is whatever the traumatic thing is that you go through, is still there. I don't care if you say you forget it. I say I was like, oh, I forget it. I forget that guy. I forget that person, whatever, and move on. But it's still there. And so, and trust me, it's been me like in the past too. So what I did, so normally with our shadow reads, I pull 2 cards from 2 different decks, and we talk about how is the shadow showing up in this area of our life, and then what can we do about it? How can we turn that into a positive, or how can we get around this or use it, for our strength? So today I'm doing something a little different. What I actually did was I pulled 3 cards, and let me put them up in the right order. So, I'm using the Dark Wood Tarot. This deck is actually specifically designed if you are kind of going on that shadow journey. It's a great deck. The interpretations, first of all, the book that comes with it is great. It's really thorough and in-depth. It's not just like reading card reversals. The shadow interpretations are a little bit different than just reading the card reversals. So I definitely recommend read through the book. It's great. So I'm using the Darkwood Tarot. The first card I pulled kind of sits in the middle. Okay. So if you look at this from the concept of past, present, future. Okay. So present, the question I asked was, how is the shadow self or shadow elements showing up in our physical body, our health, ailments, illnesses? Sorry, my little light thingy's leaving a glare on the card. I'll try to hold it like this so it doesn't do that. But the 6 of Wands, okay? So the 6 of Wands normally would be kind of like a celebratory card, right? There's triumph. You're returning home from a battle. And so with a normal tarot deck, that's a good question. You could read just reversals, but the shadow interpretations are think about what the card means, and then think about what are the darker elements of this. So for instance, one of the shadow interpretations of this card, so this is typically in a standard read, the 6 of Wands is a celebratory, you've experienced some sort of success, and you and your entourage or whoever are coming home from this to share it with others. You're celebrating together, okay? But what one of the shadow interpretations would be is, are you lording your successes over others? Okay, so see how it's not necessarily the reverse, because the reverse would usually be you did not have a success, right? Celebration is not warranted right now. It's not necessarily failure, but your trial is not over. You haven't yet succeeded. Whereas the shadow interpretation would be, did you succeed? Are you successful? But are you lording it over other people? So there's a little bit of a difference. You certainly could take a normal deck and think about even just drawing a standard card right side up. What would be not the opposite of this card, but what would be negative ramifications if this particular trait were amplified in the wrong way? What would be if I use this power for bad rather than good? So that's one way to look at it. But so as far as the shadow interpretation here, one of the other interpretations is, how does anxiety present itself in you, right? And I think that this is, with the subject that we're talking about, you couldn't have pulled a more apt card, right? So how are we taking that thing that happened to us in the past, and we're letting it root inside of us and spring into anxiety, right? Are we anxious that is going to happen again? Are we anxious that a person is going to reappear in our life that we don't want to see? Are we anxious that we're never going to get better, right? So I went through that, and I'll talk a little bit about that if we have time, but I want to get through the rest of the read. So there's lots of ways that this anxiety can be manifesting in us. And even if you think that you're not anxious, step back for a minute and objectively look at your thoughts, okay? Is there one particular thing that keeps appearing? When you sit down and you have a quiet minute to yourself, is there something that continues to pop up in your mind as like not necessarily an obsessive thought, but something that you worry on a little bit, okay? If you're anxious about it, that's kind of what we're talking about here. So that anxiety, how is that anxiety presenting in your body? Anxiety is going to trigger the release of cortisol, because when you are anxious or fearful, your body, right, just your physical body thinks there is a threat, right? This is not your higher brain that can go, oh, there's, it's stress, it's work, or I'm fearful that this whatever thing is going to happen again. Your rational mind can see that part of it, but your physical body is interpreting only what signals, what nerve signals, what electrical signals are coming from the brain. And the physical body interprets that as, oh, there's a threat. Okay, so that's where that cortisol comes from. And in the physical body, we continue to crank out that cortisol because we continue to have that worry or that fear or that anxiety about whatever that was that happened in the past. And just like the example that I gave of the patient that I saw this week, she was like 65. And this thing that happened to her at 15. Okay, so 50 years ago. And she still has this unresolved hanging out inside of her, okay? And even though she's sweet, she was a sweet woman. She, like I said, she was so strong and stoic. She was like, just put your big girl panties on and plow ahead and get through it. She never resolved that traumatic thing that happened to her. So how is that anxiety manifesting, okay? And then on top of that, in her case, she had multiple emotional traumas that happened to her that she just was like, whatever, I'm going to forget it and move on with my life and not let it affect me. But here she is at 65, and it absolutely has been affecting her this whole time. So how is this anxiety affecting you in your life? Another way that you could interpret this is jealousy and envy. Okay, so are you looking at what other people have and going, I really wish I had that person's life. I wish I had their relationship. I wish I had their job. I wish I had their looks. I wish whatever, right? So this is another way. And then, not to get into a big long soapbox again, but the last read that we did where we talked about how when we look at what other people have and we compare ourselves to others, we will never be happy with ourselves. We will never see just how beautiful that we are and everything we have going for us because we're convinced that we're ugly and we're horrible and we're dumb and we're worthless. So this is sort of like carrying on with that same thought process. Is there envy and jealousy? So when you're envious or jealous of someone, don't throw the thought away. Okay, so hear me out. Envy and jealousy are signals to us about something that we want. Okay, so they're not completely useless feelings. So again, with the shadow self, we don't want to get rid of the shadow self. The shadow self has messages to deliver to us if we listen in the right way and we put things into context. So envy and jealousy can tell us that we're not happy about a particular element of our lives. And if it's something that we can fix, that we have some measure of control over, which usually we do have some measure of control over most areas of our life, right? We can do something about it, okay? So if it's, I envy that person's relationship, okay? Are you in a relationship? Why is yours so bad, okay? And is it that it's bad? Or do you just have that perception of it, right? If you're unhappy, leave. Okay, you don't have to stay in any relationship. There's no reason to do so if you're unhappy, and especially if you and the other person are both unhappy. Okay, so perhaps ending the horrible relationship you're in is the first step to finding a better, more healthier relationship for you. Is it, I wish I had that person's job? What did that person do to get that job? Where did they go to school? What did they study? What skills do they have? How can you get those skills, right? You're not going to just walk into a bomb-ass job, right? Like that doesn't happen. None of us just walk into something like that out of college unless we're like the product of a well-connected parent, right? That has it, but that's not most of us, okay? So if somebody has a job or something, right, whatever it is that you're coveting, that you're jealous of, understand that that's normal. We all see things and we're like, wow, like I'm a little bit jealous of what that person has going on. Now, the way that I approach it is if I see somebody, let's say somebody's driving like a really fucking cool car, right? I don't hate on them. Like there's two types of people in the world. I firmly believe this. Let's say a guy drives down the highway, whatever your definition of an amazing car is, right? Let's say, for the sake of the matter, it's a Maserati, okay? And 50% of the people that he drives by are going to be like, fuck that guy. I bet he's just a rich asshole. I hope he wrecks, right? Like they want to see him lose that really bomb ass car that he's got, right? Like they're just like, I hope he loses that because I don't have that, so I don't want him to have that, okay? The other half of the people are like, holy shit, I want to know what he does. How do I get a Maserati too, okay? And I firmly believe that second camp is where you want to live. You want to be that person that you can recognize when you're a little bit jealous or envious of another person, but you can turn that into, you can transmute that traditionally negative energy into something that motivates you. Now, if I thought somebody's Maserati was awesome, I don't necessarily think that I'll never have a Maserati, but at the same time, if I never have a Maserati, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to be unhappy with my life. But if I got to that point in my life where I was so successful that I could buy a Maserati and like not even care about it, great, wonderful. But I'm also not going to hate the people who are at that point in their life. And so this is that transmutation of a traditionally thought of as a negative or shadow emotion, right? Jealousy or envy. Turn it into something that's positive, okay? So similarly with that anxiety, where is it coming from? And that's going to be actually our next card is, where did this come from? Okay, what are the roots of it? And so we'll explore that here next, okay? So card number 2 was, where did this shadow element that's affecting our physical health or our physical body, our ailments, our illnesses, where did it come from, okay? So the 2 of Swords is a card of duality. And this has actually come up in shadow reads before. And I think that when this card comes up, it's something where you need to take a look at what story's going on in your head. Okay, so this is the card where you are the victim, right? So you've convinced yourself that you are the victim, and not saying that you're not, okay? Everyone's had things happen to them that are negative or traumatic or something like that. So we've all been victims, okay? But if you are always the victim, right? It's always someone else's fault. It's never you. You've created this, inner dialogue going on where it's like, oh, everybody's done me wrong and I haven't done anything to deserve it, okay? We'll get to that in a second. This is maybe ignorance, but usually it is something that happened that was traumatic, and the person has created additional traumas, additional demons, if you will, because if you look at the card, take a look at, so in this half, you see her, she's got these like monsters coming after her, the demons in the dark wood. But if you look in the reflection, they're not there. So they're not really there in real life. She's concocted them, right, in her mind. So the story going on in her mind is, they're out to get me, or there's all this darkness around me, or there's these monsters hiding in my closet, right? It's the, it could be the fear of the unknown. It could be this traumatic thing happened and I'm positive that it's going to happen again. And so rather than, again, we can't just say, oh, just move on, because that's actually not the answer, right? Rather than dealing with it and dealing with the reason why it happened, or the fact that it happened, and trying to accept it and come to terms with it and make peace with it, she's hiding from those demons, right? She's not making peace with them. She's not befriending them. She's not dealing with them. She's not confronting them. She's covered her eyes and pretends that they're not there, right? So that's where this answers the question of, where did this shadow element come from? So whatever the traumatic thing was that happened, and there could be many of them. So in the case of the patient I, talked about, there were lots of it. in her case, it's multiple instances of emotional trauma. And what she did was she was like, you know what, I'm just going to forget about this. But forgetting is pretending like it's not there. It never goes away. Something that happened to you never stops having happened to you. That's an important distinction to make here. You can forgive and you can forget, okay? But for some people, what it takes to get rid of something or to stop letting it affect them is to sit down and confront it and talk to it, right? So like talking to your shadow self, looking your shadow self in the eyes and going, you know what, I see you. You've been through this. These things were horrible. Like for some people, it involves reliving it in order to come to terms with what happened and to release it and to let it go. You can forgive the person that hurt you if it's another person, right? Like you can forgive them all you want. You can forgive yourself if it's something that you did that you feel shame or embarrassment over. But ultimately it doesn't change what happened. It's going to take time for you to deal with the fact that this happened and it affects me and it's part of me and I can't hide it because it is part of me. I don't want to forget that part of me. And sometimes the traumas are very hard. Like the example I gave, you know, the woman that I, you know, was talking to had been molested from the age of 10 through 11. And then she started to have all these health problems, you know, within the next few years. And then she had a horrible upbringing. Neither of her parents were emotionally available. She had an alcoholic parent. She was abused during her first marriage, cheated on during her second, stayed with him. So we're talking about somebody who has internalized trauma and accepted it as normal, right? And I think to a certain, and being a parent is one of the most traumatic things I've ever gone through. The irrational fears that you experience about your child. And I think to a certain extent, we all internalize the traumas that we go through because we don't have any other way to deal with them, okay? So what this is telling us right here is instead of retreating inward, okay, when a problem arises, face it head on, okay? The only way we can grow personally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, is to look a problem in the eyes and deal with it when it happened. Now, when something happened when we were a child, we didn't have the opportunity to do that, okay? We should ideally have parents who do that for us, right? But in the instance, like again, this patient didn't have parents that did it for her, right? It didn't sound like anybody intervened on her behalf, and the abuse ended, but there was no resolution for her. There was no closure for her, okay? So if this is something that's happened far enough in the past, right, we obviously can't go back and deal with the problem because the problem already happened. What we can do is I would highly encourage you to sit down and like grab something to write with and just start writing it all out. Put it all out on paper. What I find is that when there's something particularly painful or uncomfortable that I have to deal with, in order to stop what's going on up here, I need to sit down and physically write down, I am worried about this. This bothers me. I am afraid that this is going to happen. Get the words out onto a piece of paper. And then for, another step, read it out loud and then burn it. Sometimes that's the best way to let go of something, and you might need to do it 3, 4, 5, 12, 25 times, however many times. Maybe it's every Friday. It's your ritual of, I'm going to deal with this shit. I'm going to finally deal with it. I'm not going to just put on your big girl panties and press forward. I'm going to actually deal with this shit. Okay. And as you continue to write it out and as you continue to look at it from all of your angles, you're going to all of a sudden start to notice other people involved in the situation. If there were other people, if it wasn't just you, which most of the time, there are other people involved, you weren't to blame for a lot of the things you think you're to blame for, right? So a lot of times with children, they blame themselves for their parents' divorce, right? Or they blame themselves for traumatic things that happened, like sexual abuse, and so those are the things that you want to be exploring as you're writing this out. Getting it out of your head is, what was your involvement in it? And if you weren't involved, if it had nothing to do, like rape victims, right? The number one cause of 100% of rapes is rapists, right? It's not what rape victims were wearing. It's not whether or not they had a drink. It's not were they in the wrong place at the wrong time, right? So again, it's that, are you a victim, but are you always a victim? Okay, so you also do need to be able to realize that a victim mentality, meaning it's always someone else's fault, that can often precipitate further traumatic things that happen to us. We can bring upon ourselves the thought process that it's someone else's fault when in fact we are involved sometimes. And I don't mean like rape or sexual assault or anything like that. I mean like failed relationships, right? When we fail to deal with these emotional traumas and we're the victim, right? So we were the victim probably originally, but then we consider ourselves the victim for everything else that happens to us that's bad. And sometimes it has nothing to do with someone else doing it. Sometimes it has to do with our attitude, right? When we're stuck in that loop of this horrible thing happened to me and I cannot get past it and I can't get over it and I'm just going to precipitate other horrible things happening, a lot of times we bring that on ourselves, right? So it becomes, I'm always the victim. And it becomes, I'm the victim for little shit, right? Like someone forgot to wash the dishes and now there's not any clean cereal bowls. It's someone else's fault. But you could have washed the dishes too. You know what I mean? So it starts to get like that. Now for big shit, when you really aren't the victim, you really aren't the victim. Okay, so don't take this as victim blaming. That shit drives me crazy. Okay, so again, is this created in your mind? Is this something that you basically took a bad situation and internalized it and then let it grow and created more imaginary bad situations coming from it, right? So facing your problems when they arise. Don't let those problems internalize. Don't retreat within yourself. And I'm going to be real. I'm a Cancer, okay? And Cancers, the whole crap thing, and we retreat in our shells. We sure as fuck do. Okay. And I am so guilty of this. And I'll tell you that it probably wasn't, I'll be 38 in about, I think like 10 days, maybe. Actually exactly 10 days. And yeah, you know what I mean? We retreat in our shells. It's absolutely true. Up until probably just a few years ago, I was always that person that when my feelings were hurt, I was just like, nope, I'm done. I'm walking away. I'm going to go cry in my room, or I'm going to go ignore you, shut my door, like leave me alone. And sometimes I do need to walk away. Like sometimes there's an argument or there's a confrontation or I just don't feel comfortable. And I'm like, you know what? It's best for me to walk away. Let's come back to this later when I feel like I can have a conversation with you. Cause right now I don't want to deal with it. You know what? My husband and my son are both Libras. And, so when my husband and I have an argument of any kind, or even not even an argument, just like a heated discussion, he's like, we're dealing with this right now. And I'm like, no, we're not. We are not dealing with this ever. it's the dichotomy is bizarre. And so, but I will say this, it has forced me to adapt and it's forced him to adapt. And it's actually caused a lot of personal growth for me. But I know exactly what that means. And so that retreating inward, that's me. Like that's a trait I can relate to. And in my professional life, I have learned to become incredibly assertive in more ways than one. And I will tell you that you reap rewards when you look at a problem instead of avoiding it. And I went through some dark times, like when they talk about dark night of the soul, I went through that at least a couple of times in my adult life. And, during one of those, I was legitimately suffering from depression and just didn't know it at the time, didn't get help. It got to the point where I would avoid checking my mailbox because I did not want to look at the bills, right? Little stuff like that, which is, a trademark of depression. And to the point that like legitimately the post office, closed, like they would no longer deliver mail to my house because the mail became so overfilled, they wouldn't even deliver mail to me. So I had to go pick up my mail at the post office. That's how bad it was. And I laugh like a little bit now, but like I've been there. Like that's an avoidance. So avoiding a problem retreating inward and then imagining additional problems, that's where this comes from, right? So this anxiety or whatever this is that's tearing us down, that's preventing our body from functioning optimally, stems from this avoidance of the problem, okay? Now, the third question was, what do we even do about this, right? Like, so, I mean, I'm not here to give you medical advice because you're not paying me and I'm not your healthcare provider. But from a practical standpoint, when we're looking at the shadow self, right? The wheel of fortune, this is that the world is spinning, right? The world is spinning and the world will continue to spin. Everything is a cycle. Everything that's happening now has already happened and will happen again. Everything happens in cycles, right? The ebb and flow of life. Life has ups and downs, and it will continue to have ups and downs. Always. It always has, and it always will. Okay? So that's the first piece of advice this card is telling us is, first of all, it's not just you. Everybody goes through this, right? This is a human experience. It's not trivializing or minimizing what you've been through, but everybody goes through this, right? None of us are special. We all experience these things, some of us to greater degrees than others, but we all experience these things as humans, right? If we're experiencing life, okay? Some of us may be numb to it, but hopefully that's not you. So we have these ebbs and flows, these ups and downs, okay? This is what you also want to look at here is the spinning wheel, right? Okay? So even in a wheel that is spinning, regardless of whether it's spinning in the right direction or the wrong direction, whether you're heading towards success or you're moving backwards towards failure, in that spinning wheel, the center of it will always be still. In everything that's spinning, there's always a center that is completely still and calm. And if you can access that center, you're not affected by, I mean, your life is still going to go through cycles, don't get me wrong, but you're not going to be affected by this constant turning, this constant ebb and flow. You can then go along with that cycle. You can ride along with it because now you're not worried about where it's spinning and where you are on it. You're right here in the calm and the still, and you can just go with it. Okay? Yeah, thank you. Now, so basically riding along with the challenges, the blessings, everything that comes your way, ride along with it instead of being resistant to it, right? And trying to stop it. You can't stop the world from spinning. You can't stop certain things from happening, okay? But what you can do, so I used the term earlier, transmutation, you can transmute the typically or initially resistant energy you have to that. Or, get away from the city and live in the Himalayas. I don't know if there's enough room for everyone to do that, but that could also be something, right? If we could all just figure out how to go off the grid and not have to depend on society anymore. The only problem is we wouldn't be able to support, a planet of 9 billion people on that, but, maybe like 9 million. So if we can understand that the energy that we initially feel that we are resistant to, whatever this change or this occurrence or the challenge or whatever it is, if we can look at it and go, okay, within this challenge, within this obstacle that's happening to me, this is what I'm going to learn from it. This is how I'm going to turn it around. This is how I'm going to change how I view it. And this is how I'm going to use it to better myself. Now, for sure, there are things that happen to us that are so painful and horrible that I don't expect you to find a silver lining. Like, I consider myself an optimist, and I could probably find a silver lining in most things, but like something terrible happening to my child or a loved one or something like that, I would struggle to do that. And in fact, probably wouldn't be able to, and it would be a very trying experience. So there are going to be those things, but the things that have already happened to us, especially if they've happened that long ago and we're still holding on to them and they're still unresolved, the way that they're manifesting for us in our body as far as holding us back, how can we ride along with it, right? How can we sit with that thought, with that anxiety, writing it down, speaking it out loud. How can we let it flow, right? Instead of trying to control it, how do we let go of it and stop clinging, right? So we're clinging to these things. We're trying to stop that wheel. We're trying to like hold on to the wheel and not let it spin. Let the wheel spin. Let it turn, okay? Let go of it and you start building, okay? This is also the inability to be happy and present in the present, okay? So that's also what this is telling us is we are living in the past. We are hung up on what's already happened to us and we're worried it's going to happen again. So we're missing out on what's happening right now. And I have somebody very close to me that does this often. And I ask that person, okay, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, whenever that is that you're on your deathbed, do you want to lay there on your deathbed and think, I'm really sorry that I spent so much time worrying. I'm really sorry that I worried so much about things that might not ever happen because I never could enjoy what was happening, right? I couldn't enjoy spending time with, thank you, you're welcome. I missed the moments with my spouse or my kids. I missed the joy on their face at a particular moment. I missed because I was so hung up on what might happen, right? And I think that's the lesson in all of this is what has already happened, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen again. And what might happen, right? Prepare. Don't walk through life completely unprepared, but you cannot know what is and is not going to happen with certainty most of the time. Okay? Life's going to ebb and flow, ride with it, and what comes your way, and have a plan for how to deal with it. And be aware of how you respond to those things. Because the way that you respond to them either creates more internal trauma, right? Emotional trauma and psychological trauma, more stress. We steal that pregnenolone. We make more cortisol. All of our other hormones fail. And that's when our bodies feel like crap. We gain weight. We can't sleep. We feel terrible, right? That's that physical manifestation. But that spiritual or emotional trauma that happened that we're dealing with poorly is the real root of it. So, yeah, that's it. That was a good read. We got a little deep there. Like I said, that, it was prompted by a couple of patients that I had this week that, the one case with the woman who was in her 60s, like that was incredibly hard to listen to. And like I said, she just told it like we were having a chat over coffee, like, oh, hey, yeah, this happened to me. And then this other thing happened to me. And then this other thing happened. Like it was normal. She had completely normalized, and that's a survival mechanism. It's completely normal to view these things in such a way that we don't let them get to us, but they are getting to us. We don't, on the surface, nobody can tell we've been through this traumatic thing, but deep down inside, in that moment when you're falling asleep at night and it's dark and it's quiet and there's no one else there inside your head, it's just you and your memories, it's sure as fuck still there, right? And trust me, I've been there. It takes time, but the shadow work is definitely something that's helped me. It's helped me pull up some of those things stuff that I didn't even really think was still bothering me. But as I started going through it and exploring it, thank you. It's just like the more I went into it, the more I realized how much I really was holding on to. So anyway, that was awesome. Thank you so much for being here. I'm glad that it helped. I love you. I'll probably be back tomorrow at some point. We'll do another one. If you have suggestions for topics or questions, that relate to the shadow self, throw them in the comments or DM me, and we can pull some cards and read through them. So have a really good day. Thanks for coming.